So, well, I guess we can get.
Can I get some clarification on that? If I were to assign it, I think I got it, but I don't want to turn it in and it be crazy wrong. So
I'm gonna do that, right? That's the first thing we're gonna do is talk
Yes,
about that assignment. So you can see that this edited collection is the potential end of the if I were to. And I should mention some terms that you might not know.
I'm in the same boat, Greg, so I'm glad that you brought it up too.
I try to hold out in hopes that someone else would be the question asker, but I started getting antsy. Thought maybe I was the only one. So thank you for speaking up. It does make me feel better.
What do you want to do, Greg?
I was looking at. I've got violence and ethnicity or race. Here's the last one. Trauma result of ethnicity, race, in young adult literature. So I've gotten some novels together. I've got 3 or 4 novels together, and then I've got 6 of the secondary articles put together. And so I'm gonna, if I understand it right, I'm gonna write the introduction where I kind of discuss it. And then I'm not really doing any writing. It's not like a bibliographical essay. I'm just putting the bottom on there, the bibliography, and I'm dividing that up into different sections. Do I have that understood right?
So far, yes. And then at the end, you will write the introduction.
Okay.
That introduces those texts.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
that's your final project, is that you write that introduction, which will be relatively long, and we're going to look at some. I'll show you some of those, see what I can drum up, and but you'll establish. There's kind of a pattern that you'll see in introductions to edited collections. They'll establish the rationale, the need for this particular edited collection. Might give some history about it, but that's not necessary. And then the introduction lays the basis, the foundation for the texts that we will be reading. It could be if once eliminated the section where it discusses the actual essays included in the collection, it would be just a normal essay on a topic. But these the edited collection, the essays that go with it, help put that together. So little red readings.
I guess for the one that's coming up on that's due this week, it's the 350-word introduction, and then just really the bibliography that's divided up for this week. Is that right? Or am I totally missing that?
That's what it shows on here. So the brief introduction, a bibliography of primary texts, and 3+ secondary texts.
The scholarship,
Okay.
including historical scholarly material.
Okay. So and then
That's all we're providing for this next week.
okay.
So for the primary text, those are the novels, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, it says 3 novels there. Okay, yeah.
And we're allowed to use novels that we're reading in this class.
That's correct. And I should have noted in here that the internment or forced migration, that would also be diaspora. That's a term that goes with forced migration, is the diaspora or diasporic movements. So
Is that how you pronounce that word?
diaspora, it is how you pronounce it.
It's not how my brain pronounces it.
How does it pronounce it?
Diaspora. Me too.
Yeah. So that, the Jews, when they had to wander for 40 days, no, 40 years. 40 days.
It'd have been a lot different if it were only 40
Really
days.
short period of time.
I'm pretty sure they'd still complain.
That resulted in the diaspora for them, spreading out, leaving their home and going forth. And so that forced migration happened, of course, with Africans, where they were brought to the United States and forced to leave their homes, and then this kind of spreading out. So yeah, a brief introduction. And remember, if you've got a different idea, and I gave you an idea up here with this one, but you'd have to come up with your own. If I were doing an edited collection on Foucault in children's texts, here's some articles that I would use. And Foucault wrote several books, some of them dealing with, well, all of them dealing with power in some form or another, but he's the one that came up with the idea about, well, he took Jeremy Bentham's idea about the panopticon. I talked about that, right, in the prison situation. So he took Jerry Bentham's idea and kind of really made it famous. So discipline, non-licensed discipline and its discontents, Foucauldian reading of the Giver talks about the panopticon, as does the Chocolate War. It does, because that whole thing is set up as a panopticon, but it also deals, of course, with gender. So, what did that, Gonzalez? I sometimes think she is a spy on all my actions. Dolls, Girls, and Disciplinary Surveillance in 19th Century doll film. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, sexuality, there's others, and you can see how it goes. You don't have to actually divide it yet, because you're not going to have enough to work with. The only reason I have enough to work with is because I picked those specifically so I could show you how it might develop.
And so for the primary texts, are those books that we need to have read before?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily.
Just familiarize.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Hubler's historical materialist perspectives on children's literature. That historical materialist is a different way of saying Marxism, but she doesn't use Marxism in the title for specific reason, because
Sure, I want that to be
right.
what it's associated with.
Yeah, she wants people to understand that it's bigger than Marxism. Historical materialism is a function of Marxism when it talks about the historical conditions, or the material conditions of historical moments. What is it that's producing a text? What material conditions are producing certain kinds of texts, and why? So a material condition in the evolution of printing itself would be the use of the printing press. That's one of those material conditions that contributed to the actual printing of books. But there are other material conditions that are in place for that printing press to come to being. Now, it did not thrive necessarily. It's not until later that the conditions are right for a printing press and printing books would become profitable, which is, you've got to make some money off of this stuff, unless you're just insanely rich and don't have anything else to do with your money. And they weren't like that so much. So her introduction is the case for a historical materialist criticism of children's literature. And she starts this off with a personal anecdote about her son, a picture book that focuses on two African-American characters living in the 1900s, and the response, her son's response reveals the way literature allows readers, even very young readers, to cognitively map social reality, the way in which race, class, and sex structure social inequality. And then she continues with why this kind of reading is important. And this is all separated out. So here with base and superstructure, these are the basics of Marxism to understand how base and superstructure work. So she's setting the foundation, saying that here's what you need to know about Marxism in order to be able to read the rest of these, because they're not going to give you all that information. I am. So she provides an overview of base and superstructure. Ideology is associated with Marxism. It's just part and parcel of it. And here you go. Why we are not all historical materialists now. The reasons that historical materialist analyses of society and culture are infrequently taken up are myriad. First, in his preface to a companion to Marx's Capital, the past 30 years, most particularly since the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, have not been a very favorable or fertile period for Marxian thought, and most certainly not for Marxian revolutionary politics. So the material conditions for even talking about Marxism are not positive, and material and ideological, and you can't usually separate those two. So she explains more on Marxism, and then she breaks it down more because her biggest interest, and this is what she's been writing on for a long time, is feminist historical materialism. So looking historically at the material conditions under which women had to operate and how feminism could be part of that discussion. Offers a theoretical framework that accounts for discursive and material realities, subjectivity, and politics. Lynn Vallone, Barbold, and Mary Martha Sherwood, those are writers that Vallone talks about. So she's giving this overview of feminist historical materialism. And then she moves it into children's literature, historical materialist analysis of children's literature, new contributions. So that's going to look at what this particular volume is trying to accomplish. And if I'm not mistaken, here, she talks about each chapter and she links them. She finds common items, even though everybody wrote theirs independently. She finds the common threads, and she finds a way to talk about these texts. She is able to historicize and contextualize them greater. So several essays argue that texts that appear to be progressive, in fact, offer hegemonic views of their subject matter, and so on. A number of the essays participate in the construction of a radical cultural and literary history. And then she writes a conclusion.
So the introduction is sort of essay, yeah?
It is very much an essay. It's an essay that provides context for the remaining. It provides information that you need to have in order to have to be able to read these other essays.
So when we're writing the introduction, we need to assume that our readership don't fully understand.
They might not,
Okay.
and they certainly might not know the foremost scholars on the area, in the area.
So, and we make a sort of conversation between these essays in this part introduction.
Yes, that's exactly what you do. Create a discussion among these texts written independently that links them together.
Similar to like a bibliographic essay.
Yes. But much shorter. Hi, Alex. How does it feel being on that side?
It's strange. I've been here, by the way. I've been here the whole time. I've just been reading or eating. Sorry.
Okay. Okay, so here's another one. Mothers in Children's and Young Adult Literature from the 18th Century to Post-Feminism. And here again, you'll see introduction, mothers wanted, and then all of these other essays that go with it. And they've divided it into historical legacies, maternal instruction and delight. So that's with historical texts, Edgewood, I think, yeah, Bravold and Backfish books. This is a discussion of how mothers in text instruct the children. Mothering in modernity, shifting cultures and subjectivities. The women who sent their children away. Now, sometimes these connections are going to be pretty loose, but they help contribute to make to give a person a pretty broad understanding if they were to read all the essays. The mother-child bond, fantasy and desire for the real, that's psychoanalytical. Performing post-feminist motherhood. Whether living or dead, present or absent, sadly, dysfunctional or happily good enough, the figure of the mother carries an enormous amount of freight across the emotional and intellectual life of a child. In her materiality, as well as in the child's imaginary landscape, she plays many roles and bears many burdens, a place from which to launch, and a home to return to, a secure envelope that protects on one that hides and stifles, a voice that guides and chastises, a surface on which to project the quest of self-understanding. So, topic here, motherhood, making some general statements about motherhood that you'll probably be able to pick up from your reading on of all of these essays if you were to have been collecting these. So here, much of the theoretical writing on motherhood is focused on gender studies, chastising the rigid gender stereotyping that is found in many portrayals of mothers. Yeah, that's something we've come to expect in some ways. Given the vital role literary mothers play in books for young readers, as they of course do in actual lives, it is remarkable how little scholarly attention has been paid to other aspects of their representation. The range of critical approaches to mothers and children's and young adult literature and the published scholarship does not yet begin to approach the volume and quality of attention paid to mothers in other disciplines. Other disciplines like psychology, sociology, anthropology, history, women's studies, and literature for adults takes that topic on, but not scholarship for children from children's, not from children's-led scholars. So it's about time, they say, and that's the rationale for putting this together. So you kind of have to have a rationale for putting yours together. And so this talks about the general nature of the scholarship available here, two streams. First stream, conceptual and theoretical. And you can see they list a whole bunch. So feminist constructions as dominant theory, and from, because I'm fortunate enough to have been in this profession for a really long time, I know about a lot of these books and have studied a lot of them. You won't necessarily have done that. Always a disadvantage. There'll be a time when nobody knows who Chodorow is, when she was the one that really had something significant to say about motherhood. Conceptual Randall for these clothes, or we need more attention to lives of particular mothers, to mothers' own voices, and as literary characters. And so here, this is talking, so part of it's talking about the real mother, and some of it's talking about the conceptual theoretical mother. That's the two main streams that she identifies here, and kind of gives an overview of what's available. And they explain, once again, kind of like Hubler explained why historical materialism has not, why aren't more scholars historical materialists. And then, so this one is why was so much attention given to mothers elsewhere, like in psychology and sociology and those areas? Is there a relative dearth of attention to mothers in humanities? We think there are several reasons, and they go out and list them. Several scholars continue to investigate the representation of mothering in literature from a psychoanalytical, and this is still more of a review of what's out there for the big picture. And then later on, expanding the conversation. And here they explain the layout of the book and what they're doing. And then that's where they start putting these texts in conversation with each other. In the essays we have chosen to include here, we have sought to expand the theoretical paradigms within which representations of mothering can be understood and applied to a range of topics. We have divided the book into 4 parts. So they're talking about the physicality of the text and justifying those divisions, and then talking, giving a brief overview of what is in the following chapters. Is that making sense a bit? So almost any edited collection will have this kind of thing. The introduction is my favorite. It tells me everything I need to know. And it points me, as it happens, I've read all of this, and they were all so thoughtful and helpful in different kinds of ways. So my whole take on mother, I now pay attention to what mothers are doing in literature. I might not be writing about it, but they're on my radar.
It's now something you see.
It's something I see. Yeah. And, in fact, the question comes up in Parvana's journey. I saw several things about adults and not adulting, not parenting. Parents and not parenting. So those are 2 really good introductions to look at. Yours won't be this long. So you'll have to be selective as to what you want to include. You'll need to have some kind of general introduction, a rationale for putting them together, maybe a brief overview of scholarship, some of the most noteworthy individuals, and you could probably pick those up from the works cited of the text that you're going to be using in your edited collection. And a discussion, you'll then bring them into discussion, your edited collection essays into discussion with each other, and a conclusion. What was that, 4 parts, 5? Just 5-paragraph essay. Woo!
I haven't done that since high school.
Run amok. That's what a dissertation is, by the way.
Just a giant.
Just a giant 5 chapters.
So you're telling me that I would be able to do that?
Yeah. All right. So that's 2, and you can look these up and read them more carefully and see. And I might actually have have created a PDF of one of the introductions. And I'll see if I can find some other introductions, books to edited collections that you would find helpful. So Greg, does that help you with anything?
Yes, ma'am. So the introduction, and then maybe a bibliographic essay on how they relate, kind of tie it together.
Kind of. You'll have to, I suggest that you read these introductions so that you see for your final project what you'll be doing with them. Like I said, I'll try to find a number of them for you to look at for the introductions. But for the assignment coming up, it's just, 3 articles?
3+ articles.
3
novels.
primary.
3 primary, 3 secondary, an introduction that's kind of setting it up for me to read it. And then you're going to expand on that later. Basically,
Later. Okay. That's
in your final project.
in the final project. Gotcha. Okay.
And if you decide to change your mind midway, that's okay.
We all do that a few times.
I did it with a whole dissertation.
Oh, God, that would kill me.
Well, I didn't write the dissertation. I went through all the exam and the exams for it and everything.
And then change your mind?
And said, I can't work with this for the next 2 years. I just can't.
So
It's not what I want to do.
I'm not doing an introduction, and I apologize, Doctor. I don't know why this isn't getting into my head on this assignment. I'm probably thinking about it way too much. I'm doing one introduction for this assignment, in kind of introducing the 3 and 3 articles and kind of
Tell
setting
me
that up.
tell me what these things have in common. What is it these explore? What topics do these items explore so that I don't have to read your articles?
Gotcha. Okay,
You're
so
telling me,
I'm telling you what those 6 total articles are in my introduction, and then I'm just listing kind of the bibliography of those 6 articles below that.
right, it's not 6 articles though, it's 3 novels. And I'm only having you list those so that you're thinking about ways that you can think about novels.
Yes, ma'am.
So on Parvana's Journey, well, on now you're all going to see invisibility everywhere in the novels that you read. So that kind of thing. You'll have your introduction, you'll have your bibliography below, and divide that into primary and secondary sources.
Primary being
3
novels.
primary being the novels, 3 secondary being the scholarship. So an introduction. So the following texts I have chosen speak directly to invisibility in young adult literature. For instance, so-and-so's article uses Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man to discuss how the prevalence of invisibility in several novels with a focus on the 3 novels that I focus on. Similarly, this article, the next one, identifies ways that invisibility manifests itself and the consequences of invisibility. I'm making this up. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Okay?
I see.
So,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
is that making sense?
Yes,
So you've
ma'am.
got that
Yes.
beginning
Yeah.
introduction that describes the project, basically, what these articles are doing. Then you have your bibliography and its primary and secondary sources divided. That's it.
And this is due next Wednesday, correct?
Or you do Tuesday.
It says Wednesday on the thing.
That's fair.
It's like a page and a half, right? 350 words.
Yeah,
So, all right, so next Friday then, if you don't care.
maybe.
Yes.
Maybe.
We have next week, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Just that, I'm afraid those last. Whenever I get around to it.
Gotcha.
Yeah. End of the semester. All right, so does all of that, is that now becoming a little less muddy?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
And so-
Unless I turn it in and it's wrong,
No, what'll happen is you'll start working on it and you'll say, what did she say?
yeah, that's right.
Which is the benefit of having this recording.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Jolene,
Thank you.
what are you thinking of yours?
Well, now I'm jumping ship on what I initially thought I was going to be doing, probably.
What?
Because I know.
You're so sad.
I know. It's because I didn't understand, I think. So I think I am going to go with the forced migration and intermittent
Diaspora.
diaspora.
See how much is available.
Right, and then go from there. So I understand now, like, we're finding at least 3 articles. We have to have read those articles in order to put them in conversation together. We don't have to have read the novels
That's
that
correct.
they're talking about.
That's correct.
Okay,
But you can use those articles to find the novel
of course.
if you want. That's an option. Because I know not everybody has studied children's literature.
Right.
Jeannie, this is your first class, right? Second.
I did picture books.
Picture books, and that's a whole different animal.
Oh, so that's you.
Right.
So, yeah, this is the first time you've explored. And it might have been a while since you read a young adult adolescent novel.
Quite.
Well, because what I was thinking, why I was so set on the thing before is because I really, like, if y'all were in my cohort or whatever, picture books, I latched on to that the Todd Lieber article, and I loved it, and talked about invisibility and mask wearing, and like, oh my gosh, that was just like earth-shattering for me. I loved it so much. That didn't talk about young adult literature in there, so I can't use it.
Can't use that.
And so if I can't use that, I'm gonna
I don't
jump
want
ship.
I don't want to
I don't want to
anything.
do that. I'm gonna do something else. So, no, seriously. It's
Yes,
gonna happen.
I remember in the picture book, it's been a long time, but I remember it very well, like that's, I remember we learned that mothers are pretty much invisible.
Yes,
And so far, it's been true here too.
yes,
And is that throughout?
yes.
Or is that, okay?
You see
Parents.
Well,
children's
they-
TV
that-
too. It's
that-
ridiculous.
But there's a reason for
They
it.
have to be absent or else the
kid
the
won't.
kid doesn't,
They
the
can't
kid
do.
struggle.
Star, yeah.
Yeah, they can't do their growth thing.
I have to admit,
Just
having
so-
been on both sides of that, I'm like, you know, back in the day, I was like, yeah, cool, they don't have parents to worry about. Now I'm like, where are your parents?
Right, so if you think about, and it's been pretty consistent, so if you think about the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe,
They
they
have
can't possibly have the
uncle somewhere.
adventures with parents around that they need to have. They can't possibly grow and develop with those troublesome parents.
Those role-making demons.
Yes. Now, earlier literature for children, say like in the 50s, 40s and 50s, it was more family oriented, and you would see lots of adult interaction. But and you get adult interaction in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe with Aslan. So there is a very formidable adult.
It's just not a parent per se.
Well,
I mean, in a way,
he acts as a parent.
right.
He's a
but-
substitute parent.
Right. He's not
human parent.
physically there.
He's what?
He's just not a human parent.
Exactly.
He's the figure that steps in
Mm-hmm.
when the need is there.
And there was an era back there also when you're talking about when the parent was there, that they were wise. I can think of a couple of examples, but it's clearly back now. Well, now isn't maybe the right word, but like Harry Potter, they went away to school so that it was, so I can really
And they've
see
got
it.
plenty of adults around
Right,
them.
Right, but there was still always,
But, they have mechanisms of not being
Yes.
seen by adults, like the invisibility cloak. And that kind of thing. Dumbledore knows everything.
Right.
We know that.
Well, he's got spies all over the
Yeah.
castle.
And children have for a long time, this whole business about being saviors, it is nothing new under the sun. They have been, and the reason is because our Western culture depicts them as innocent. You can do so much with innocence, that clear-eyed. It's a myth, it's a fantasy that Western culture embraces. And it's easy to get lost in it. Unfortunately, we can't do that anymore. And I'm going to show some clips in just a minute of, that kind of reminds us of why. But so at the back of the North Wind, the character, the young character in that one, what's his name? Oh, I don't remember. Anyway, he brings wisdom to his, I think it's father who is an alcoholic or something like that. He brings this purity to purify others. And then prior to that, when we see these, what were they called? Janeway.
Dr. Stewart, is the token book for children the Puritan one,
Yes.
where they're holding
So
frightened
it is
children over the
called-
grave?
Yeah, it's called A Token for Children, being an exact account of the conversion, holy and exemplary lives, and joyful deaths of young children in 2 parts by James Janeway.
That was hysterical when we read that last semester in Dr. Rosenkamp's class.
Uh-huh. It was written in 1636. No, I'm sorry, that's when he was alive.
Printed for J. Ward in
1757. It would have been published before then, because if he died in 74, it was published in his lifetime, because he did 2 of them. But in that story, you have, the adults are pretty decent and everything, but you have really, really sick children. And the only thing they want in life, which is your death, is to be forgiven to lead an exemplary life and to be an example to the people around them. So they're busy, while they're dying, busy praying for everybody around them and to be a holier spirit, or, you know, to be holier and to be, it's really, it's formulaic.
Just to admonish everyone, don't be like I was.
Yeah.
Be a better person.
Be a better person. It's all about conversion. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Whether it's being themselves converted or converting those around them
Mhm.
through lesson, through example. Really dreadful stuff. Very popular.
Yes.
If I have a moment, I will put this together. It won't, see, I'll limit it down to 3 articles so I can keep it into the 350 word overview. And that way you can see, I'll set it all up, but I have to dig some time.
Would it be okay to do 4, and that way, if one of mine is way off track, you could throw it out and, or at least, I mean, just tell me that I'm way off base.
Mhm.
Okay.
You guys make me write a lot. That's good.
We like
Specificity.
Yes.
That's a good word, specificity.
If one can say it, it is.
I had a professor whose favorite word he told us was syphilis. Because it is a pretty word. If you, it's got a really lovely sound to it. I like Sisyphus.
I do too.
I think that has a nice sound to
I've always been a fan of persnickety.
it. Persnickety.
Perspicacity.
I'd have to be able to pronounce it. There's some words I just can't hardly do. So you've got your assignment due for next week, and then
We're
week
not
7.
Meeting next week.
That is correct.
Okay.
No meeting. And then Dear Martin is for week 7, and it is,
We're writing an article that is not.
right, right.
Can work for the novel, right?
Yeah, so I'm getting you to do all kinds of research, you know, pertaining to, illustrative of, yeah, backwards, forwards.
So aside from reading the novel, that's the only thing we have to do.
Mhm.
Or
Not bad, huh? It's a longish novel, though.
I mean, turn in the
Yeah,
bibliography or whatever.
you have to turn this in.
Yes.
Yeah, where you
Explain your
explain
choice.
why your choice would be helpful in understanding Dear Martin. Yeah, always be sure to read the instructions.
That takes
I
time.
wrote to read instructions though.
And it takes me 0 work to go, 0.
So my students said all the time, oh, you're hurting my feelings by not turning that in.
Oh,
Oh.
Oh.
So
I just say 15 minutes.
And here we go. I've got really positive responses on the novel.
I loved the dialogue. That's what I, especially between Carvana and, is it
Essie?
Asif.
Steve? Especially when they first met in the cave and they were just bickering back and forth like brothers and sisters do. It reminded me so much of my brother and I, because that's how we like argue. Yeah.
I like the dialogue too, because it was like the one thing about them that still remained childish in a lot of ways. Because of course their actions weren't, they had to grow up very
It's a
quickly.
horrible novel.
Right.
I mean, it's wretched, and everything it brings to us from maggots in
Your face.
Leela? I tried to read that and I was like, okay. Yeah, I was like, dang it, they made it to the floor.
Did you figure that Leela was gonna die though?
No,
Yeah,
I didn't.
With her right into the minefields and her thinking that she's immune, I kind of saw it coming just because, you know, every child thinks they're invincible and then something happens to make them realize they're not. Sometimes they survive.
Yeah.
I thought of everything we've read, this was the least like fiction. It was
Yeah.
very real.
Yeah.
I think it's because it was, I felt like it was written very much like a diary almost, you know, outside of her letters to her friends, because we were reading it from the first person, and basically it was like, here's what we did this day and that day. I think that's why it felt less like fiction than anything else.
Yeah, she's using epistolary in there with the letters too.
I like
a friend.
About the word paranoia, I want to say that this word paranoia means exactly butterfly in English, and of course we have the same word in Persian. We pronounce it paranoia, but Afghans pronounce it paranoia. And I think the author of this novel has used this word purposefully because it shows her protagonist's vulnerability, and also it brings up the notion of movement. As Paola doesn't stay in one place, she's all throughout the novel, and this is a characteristic of the paranoia or butterfly. And yeah, that's it. But about the novel itself, what is most interesting to me is the way these children at their age just struggle for survival. They are stuck in a kind of war-torn country. They are immersed in the trauma of losing their loved ones or even being abused by the adults. But their resilience and the bravery, I think, are really admirable. And what else I like about this novel is the way that the author depicts the characters. Both sides of the characters are, both sides of human beings actually are depicted here. We see Asim is very passionate to Hassan, but at the same time he's obnoxious, very, very unpleasant. Or even Parvana, the protagonist, is not flawless. She takes care of other children, she nurses other children, but at the same time we see she gets fed up with those children. She has herself wife, she has to take the pain of being with these children. Hassan, who is unable to do anything for himself, and as if he's in her can't do anything actually. It can't be of great help, but we see, I think in this way, the author makes her novel more natural, so the reader can identify with the characters or with the situation of the novel better, because nobody is flawless. So we see even the protagonist, who is very helpful, still she sometimes gets fed up with them.
I would too. Made me tired.
Yes.
Very, very tired. So, and what I'm going to show in the next few minutes, I should note too that it's interesting that you brought up about Butterfly, because there is a novel, a young adult novel. I think does anybody know Spanish for butterfly? Is it Maricopa? No. Mariposa. La Mariposa, right? I think that's the title of a novel of, it's kind of semi-autobiographical about a boy who comes to the United States from Mexico and doesn't have papers. And that's the title of the book. La Mariposa. So it's him making this really long, hard journey, and the struggles once he gets here of staying, and because they're migrant workers, and it's just not an easy life. If you look, I should have looked at this too, or should have brought this up. Children as Saviors is, like I said, nothing new. Children's Crusade. Okay. 1212, a failed popular crusade by European Christians to regain the Holy Land, northern France. Why is this children's? Okay, and children being sold into slavery. Many children were tricked by merchants and sold over to what they thought were the Holy Lands, but in reality were slave markets. Where's the disambiguation? Conquer the Holy Land in 1212. 1993 to 1994. Oh, that's DC. Slaughterhouse-5. If you've read Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-5, it's the bombing of Dresden during World War II and the horrendous destruction. That's a subtitle of his book. March of the Mill Children, 1901. They've been doing this kind of thing forever. So it's not anything new for us. And this is from Global Citizen that points out 9 badass youth are changing the world. And Marley Diaz, 11, all-star reader who in 2016 organized a book drive. Now she's got a new project. 2015, Sophie Cruz, 5 years old at the time, broke through a security at Papal Motorcade to give Pope Francis a letter asking that her parents, who are undocumented immigrants, not be deported from the U.S. Monet Davis showed the world that girls can play ball with the boys and win. First African-American girl to compete in the Little League World Series. First girl to pitch a winning game at the LWS, and the youngest athlete to be featured on the cover of Sports Illustrated. At least it wasn't the bathing suit issue. Kid president, have you seen this kid?
I love him.
He's pretty adorable. If we're all the same team, let's start acting like it, he tells in this video. Hayal Jangid, after escaping from child slavery in Delhi, 14 at the time, became an advocate for girls' education and won a World Children's Prize for her work with rural communities in India. She's now the leader of her town's child parliament, working to make her village child-friendly. Avery McRae took the United States government to court for burning fossil fuels. They argue man-made climate change challenge their future and by their constitutional right to due process under the law. Chotitkat, climate change activism, ban plastic bags. Kids are at the forefront.
Recently, I read where this one kid, I don't remember if he knew the little girl or that, I know they were neighbors, but a little girl was left in a hot car and she died. And so it really upset him. So he created a device that installs like on the car seat to prevent kids from getting overheated in hot cars if they're left there. Yeah, and I don't remember the details exactly, but he was getting so much praise because it actually works. And so, I mean, but it took a little girl dying, and I mean, that's something that's very prevalent today.
Yes.
But it takes this kid saying, like, this has to end.
And here's how you do it.
Yeah, and he did it.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, Emma Gonzalez and her crew.
We'll be watching you. This is all wrong. I shouldn't be up here. I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. And yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you? For more than 30 years, the science has been crystal clear. How dare you continue to look away and come here saying that you're doing enough when the politics and solutions needed are still nowhere in sight? You say you hear us and that you understand the urgency. But no matter how sad and angry I am, I do not want to believe that. Because if you really understood the situation and still kept on failing to act, then you would be evil, and that I refuse to believe.
She's fierce.
The popular idea of cutting our emissions in half in 10 years only gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees and the risk of setting off irreversible chain reactions beyond human control. 50% may be acceptable to you, but those numbers do not include tipping points, most feedback loops, additional warming hidden by toxic air pollution, or the aspects of equity and climate justice. They also rely on my generation sucking hundreds of billions of tons of your CO2 out of the air with technologies that barely exist. So a 50% risk is simply not acceptable to us, we who have to live with the consequences. To have a 67% chance of staying below a 1.5 degrees of global temperature rise, the best odds given by the IPCC, the world had 420 gigatons of CO2 left to emit back on January 1st, 2018. Today that figure is already down to less than 350 gigatons. How dare you pretend that this can be solved with just business as usual and some technical solutions? With today's emissions levels, that remaining CO2 budget will be entirely gone within less than 8.5 years. There will not be any solutions or plans presented in line with these figures here today, because these numbers are too uncomfortable and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is. You are failing us, but the young people are starting to understand your betrayal. The eyes of all future generations are upon you. And if you choose to fail us, I say we will never forgive you. We will not let you get away with this. Right here, right now, is where we draw the line. The world is waking up, and change is coming, whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Pretty amazing and terrifying. So Allie asked, pondering the question, to what extent do a family and society turn to the child as savior and activist simply because adult solutions have failed? What parallels can we draw to today's society? One that comes to my mind is Greta Thunberg's speech at as the United Nations Climate Action Summit. She remarks that she should not be having to give the address as a child herself, lamenting that her dreams have been stolen by the adults' lack of action. So it's Pravana's Journey. When was it published?
2002,
2002, I think.
2002.
2002. So 17 years have passed, and the call for children to do something. You know, the whole population, or the cliche is that our children are our future. That if we're polluting their world, then there is no future. So things have not changed. They've only gotten worse to a great degree. And all of this I'm saying with an understanding the large cultural differences we all different different cultures have, attitudes they have toward how they think of children, what they want them to do, even historically. In the United States, well, in England, they were little workers, you know. They would have, well, they had lots of children because they didn't have birth control. I'm talking about the working lower class. They didn't have birth control available to them, and so they had scads of children. And what do you have when you have scads of children? Well, you have a little workforce. And you have to have a little workforce because you got to feed all those mouths. So yeah, they get to go to work and tend to things. Mothers and fathers love them just as much as what we love our children today. It's just that conditions, material conditions, didn't permit the luxuries of having this kind of a notion of protected childhood. But it's a notion of protected childhood. We know that. We see they're exposed to what they're exposed to every single day if you just turn on the news for a little bit. So, wow, adults have been stealing children's dreams for centuries, I would say. It's just gotten bigger, I think, possibly. And certainly the kids that are, what school was it? Parkland High School. You know, they were all over the news when the shooting first happened, and we don't hear from them now because the news doesn't cover them. So what do we say about that? Because supposedly covering them politicizes questions regarding guns and gun control. Stephanie, as I read Steffler's article, specifically the relationship between generous child and needy child, I thought back to a story that recently went viral on Twitter. It was about a 7-year-old boy who has been saving money to go to Disney World, but ultimately donated his savings to provide food for Hurricane Dorian evacuees. The child was later on surprised with a free trip to Disney for his generous and kind-hearted deed. But what struck me prior to this were the string of comments lamenting the fact that a child was doing an adult's job. A child who should use that money for Disney instead did what adults failed to do. This is a real-life example of how we have burdened a child, just as Pravana is burdened when adults do not step in to care for her and the other children. Can this be fixed, both on and off the page? After reading Steffler's article, what solution would you propose to eliminate the lesson, the burden of responsibility unfairly places on a child's shoulder? I do want to comment. The 7-year-old boy, nobody's coerced him, as far as we know. He did it because he had a need to give. And that's okay. And in fact, if all of us, from childhood on, it's kind of like thinking, oh, we don't develop that until we're adults. No, what if we developed as children? Then it would be a lifelong effort of being generous.
And that's something that he saw because his parents probably did it too.
Probably so.
And that's why he's like, well, if my mom and dad practice this really good thing with other humans, I should do it. Because I'm a little human and that's what I should do.
Uh-huh.
And I have this, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's how it gets passed on so easily.
I was gonna say there's definitely other ways of looking at that. I agree and disagree. I think that as children we are attempting to instill very adult values, honesty, compassion, empathy, things like that are often beyond their years, but things that take a lot of time to hone and learn and try. And I think I kind of agree. I think it's something that's probably been modeled or even put on that heart of that child that I don't necessarily see as a bad thing. Like my son, for example, like money was always a struggle for me growing up. I didn't have anything. For my kids, they don't have that same struggle. But like when my kids get allowance, my oldest, he wants to buy food like at the grocery store with his money. And I'm like, you don't need to do that. Like, you know, that like he wants to buy orange juice and stuff like that. Like, it's so weird. You know, that's what he wants to spend his money on.
That's different. That is very different.
It's very different. And I'm like, save your money. And he's not, I mean, he's a saver. He's not a spender, but it's like what he spends his money on is so different to me. But at the same time, it's like, I feel bad. Like, you know, why do you feel like you need to buy that stuff? Like, if you want orange juice, I'll buy you orange juice. But at the same time, I do think that they have those moments, kind of like this child, the 7-year-old did, where they want to do something that they think is good. Like, Mommy, you don't have to buy that for me. I want to buy that for myself. And I don't personally see that as a bad thing. I see that as, you know, that's just another value. You know, where do you draw that line between which values are burdensome? Because being honest all the time and being passionate and not lying and things like that, those can be burdensome, but they're important.
Yeah, and you know, part of what we think about books, we don't want to teach our kids how to be selfish, right? That's the last thing that we want to do. No, don't share with anybody else. You keep that to yourself. And we want to teach them to be kind of it. No, don't kick that person. Or don't bite. Whatever else children do, we try to instill as young as possible, most adults, how they want their children to be as adults. I don't know where things get lost. So, and I can't say because I don't have children.
I think it potentially gets lost a lot in that a lot of people or a lot of parents are very much of do what I say, not what I do. Like in this instance, I'm sure that the child's parents are givers, but you know, some people will like, well, you need to be kind, and then turn around and are not kind themselves. Exactly. And so I think that's where it becomes a huge burden, and that's probably where it gets very lost. Mm-hmm. Is if the parents themselves don't follow the rules they're setting for their children.
If they even are setting those rules.
Yeah, well, one can.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a capitalist culture. There is nothing.
Well, I have to admit, I have taught my daughter to throat punch somebody if they ever approach her and she says no.
That if we live in a capitalist culture, capitalism does not reward generosity. Mm-hmm. In fact, on your income taxes, it's the last thing, you know. There isn't that much of a break for generosity.
Well, and then a lot of people use their generosity as a means to get a break. It's not generosity for the sake of being generous.
But even if we are generous because it makes us feel good, isn't there something selfish about that?
That's true, because it makes us feel good.
Yeah, in some ways. I mean, the argument's been made about Mother Teresa that there, you know, she wasn't that special. She got a lot of joy from being who she was. I don't know that. I'm not in her head, neither is anybody else in her head. She's gone now, I suppose, right? She died quite some time ago.
Yeah.
Probably. She was an old woman. Long time ago. And then, you know, like I said, being a capitalist and living in a culture that praises money above all, it's kind of hard to contradict those values with reality. Or at least it sets up a tension that's kind of uncomfortable. And of course, Disney is the ultimate consumer-driven place.
Yeah, expensive is they just eat there.
How much does it cost to get in?
Man, you start trips out at like $5,000, and it's just like I haven't. That's why my kids haven't gone. My kids don't even. Their closest trip to Disney World is the Disney store at the mall. So.
And that's expensive.
Yes,
it's about $85 a person per ticket at the gate.
I can't even imagine.
And then that's just for like one
day in one
kingdom in one day. And like, because you got like the Magical Kingdom, you got Epcot, and you got. So if you want to go to all of those, it's like $85 per world per person, and like a family of 4, that's about the break you.
Plus food and
right, yeah, and then the food is ridiculously expensive.
What were you saying, Megan?
I was saying it's plus food and souvenirs. I'm the resident Disney person. Yeah, so.
And then you gotta think hotel, and then you gotta think cost to get
Yeah.
there. And oh my,
It's pretty pricey when you think about it.
my
But
children are just gonna not get the experience.
Maybe that's all right.
I just don't like crowds more than the money. I'm like,
They can.
I do not even need to pay that much money.
My kids
to
can
be
take their own
close
kids.
To,
I'll take my
that many
grandkids.
people. Like,
I would pay money to not be close to that many people.
right.
That's when you go in the off season. Like I would go. My grandparents had a timeshare in Florida, and so we would go during Christmas time. And I would go with my grandpa, and it was always Epcot. I love my grandpa, but dang, I wanted to see some of the other ones. But it wasn't nearly as crowded in December as it would have been in like June and July.
Yeah.
So that wasn't too bad. You gotta pick when you go.
No. So, oh, Shay, this is you.
Oh, sweet.
Steffler discusses Lisa Mackman's idea that the child savior serves the ideals of the childhood in the West and that the child victim is the East needing to be saved. This idea makes one uncomfortable as one wonders if the child in need needs what it is we have to give them. Not food, safety, shelter, but more the ideals of what childhood should offer. This certainly brings about the memories of colonization under the guise of helping. Could this be an unconscious influence in writing books about the other that is unfamiliar to Western readers? Now, Alice has done her time. She spent a great deal of time in Afghanistan. She worked with women to help them fight against oppression, to help protect them. And I think she wrote maybe a book called The Women of Afghanistan. I can't remember. It's been a long time ago. So I wrote an article once on this, and Gloria Whelan's Homeless Bird. Gloria Whelan is writing Homeless Bird about India, but she's never even visited. But she's researched it. So I see that as really problematic. But go ahead and speak to this, Shay.
Well, the article that we read, it mentioned the colonization thing, and it kind of picked up for me, that particular idea, because, when, Britain was colonizing India and all these other places, they thought they were helping everybody by bringing, stability and everything. And so it's like, it just made me really think, are we really helping these people, or are we just trying to make them like us? Outside of the obvious food, safety, shelter type of needs that everyone needs.
Mm-hmm.
It really made me think. And that's one of the reasons I brought up the question, because, it's always, we always categorize ourselves as not better, but like we know more, like,
it's better.
Superior.
There is a sense of superiority.
Right. Versus, it's always been like a Western versus Eastern kind of philosophy.
We're more educated.
Right. And that's kind of in like Western medicine versus Eastern traditions and things of that sort. And that really just kind of brought all of that to mind. And so that's why I was like, is this something that we still unconsciously kind of put in our work when we're writing?
I think it's conscious too, because it's for the good of them, for their good. So this goes to that question or observation you had about paternalism. It's that convincing folks that things that might be oppressive are actually good for them. So that's a paternalistic attitude. So convincing the slaves that Christianity was going to be their salvation because they get to go to heaven, but only if they obey the master, because that's part of Christianity. You've got to obey your masters. And so that kind of paternalistic attitude applies there in that colonization. Yeah, we're doing it because of that idea that
it's going to totally help you out, but it's really going to help us out.
Yeah, just ignore that part.
Yeah.
It's a win-win, right?
Well, after reading the novel, I actually was doing research for a different class. And it led me into watching a documentary on Vietnam and how we ruined and held that whole entire situation. And when France was occupying and influencing Vietnam, it was like, I'm going to be here and save the day. We were wanted to be the saviors and said, let's do this.
But did they really?
Yeah, and just to look back and
Why didn't you just leave everybody alone?
yeah, why didn't we just leave everything alone? And then and reading the novel, comparing what I saw and to Afghanistan and what Parvana went through, it's just, why aren't we just leaving everything alone? Because we are still in that war.
Yes. And we can also say the same thing about democracy. People in the United States think democracy is a pretty cool thing, and it's been the policy of the United States for a very long time to spread democracy.
Right.
Because it's good for you. It's liberating.
Imperialism.
Yeah. And here's what we'll do. We'll kill you in order to spread democracy. Don't worry about
And
that
we'll
part.
plant ourselves right here in the middle.
Yes, and we'll make everything brain out. Yeah, so that's, yeah, I'm a firm believer in the positives of democracy, even though we don't live in a democracy, as Violet might have reminded you in the last. It's a republic. Isn't it funny how all these books work together in some weird way? But yeah, democracy is that paternalistic kind of colonizing attitude as well.
I mean, that's what we did in colonizing the United States.
Yes.
We're democratic, we're going to come in and we're going to create a whole new system. And, oh, what are these people? Nah.
Yeah.
They didn't mean to be here.
They don't know what's
We're going
good
to
for
bring
them.
them the syphilis.
They don't know what's good for them. We
Sounds
do.
nice.
I know.
That should be part of a Monty Python skit or something.
Megan, here you are. Throughout the novel, Parvana dresses as a boy and goes by the name Kasim to avoid the perils of femininity as well as to be able to work for food or money. Yet as the novel progresses, she allows her hair to grow out and for her true self to be recognized. Does this allude to the ways of the Afghani culture and Parvana trying to escape them, or does this show us Parvana's growth into an accepting child, that she is a woman and embracing that fact? And I'll give you a little bit of background, and it's been ages since I read The Breadwinner, which is the one that precedes this, and it's when Parvana goes out with her father. I can't remember I don't know. I can't remember why they're traveling.
Yeah, it totally is. Like, second book, it is. Why would she start us in the middle of the series?
No, that was one of my other questions. Did we really need the background information of the first book to fully understand how we got here and all that kind of fun stuff? But I don't know.
And I can't say for sure because I can't remember very much about it, except that she dressed as a boy there.
I think that was after, from what I read, because I did a little background research on this series. Was it after her dad was jailed that she decided to dress as a boy to work?
She had to, yeah,
Right.
because she couldn't work otherwise.
And
Yeah.
the little brother was fighting, like she was wasn't she the oldest child?
Yes.
And so
No.
she was the
Second.
Because Noria.
right?
Uh-huh.
So I guess she was the one that had to become the breadwinner of the
Yes.
family.
Yeah. So I don't know if it is. Like I said, I can't remember enough about it to know. But for my purposes, why did I pick this book, do you think?
I don't know. I just not feel like I got started at the beginning.
It kind of harps on the fact of the continuing thing that we've been talking about, invisibility, really, really well, because this is not so subtle invisibility. This is the invisibility that is right under our noses that we are choosing to avoid looking at. Because we don't want to see children in pain.
No. Man, those commercials with the children with the extended bellies and flies on them and cheer, I would pay not to see those.
Exactly.
I would give money. I would
That's the
give
point.
money.
They want
That's
you to
the
give it.
point.
Except I
That's
still
the
have to
point
see
of
it.
the commercials. But it plays on our maternal paternal instincts that we have. We, for some unknowable reason, we as a species and every species throughout nature protect our children as much as we can.
Has to,
Our new
in
generation.
order to perpetuate the species.
Right.
Exactly.
But we tend to ignore the needs of other children over the needs of our own children. I think that's where some of it.
It is very home driven and very, I need to take care of my kids before I can take care of anybody else's. It is very
Right, and the same applies in the United States, because we have an enormous number of children who
don't even
don't have a place to live, who
don't get enough food.
You don't even want to know how many homeless children are registered at the typical high school.
Oh my goodness,
it's
yeah.
awful.
They would when we were still living in Greenville, because we are under a certain percentage under the poverty line, certain kids, they would send food home on Fridays, like just a bag of like snack food, macaroni, juice for these kids, because you didn't know if they were going to eat over the weekend. This was right after they started doing free breakfast and free lunch at the campus that my kids were at, and it's surprising how many of these kids wouldn't have even the basics if it weren't for
And
schools
so
doing that.
if we're not doing anything about here, what do you do over there? And the depictions telling us about what Afghanistan used to look like is quite, because from the very beginning, I've always thought of Afghanistan as
what it's become.
What has become, and not the beautiful
I
garden.
liked that she contrasted that, because we don't know.
No.
We would never have thought that it'd be such a. And it's really a shame that we wouldn't think that. A lot of the countries over in the East are just gorgeous with gardens and things of that sort, because they've just got such fertile land over there sometimes.
As long as it stop.
Right.
Well, and Megan, you're right. One of the reasons I picked this was about invisibility. And we're kind of moving to resistance at this point as well. And it's always been about resistance as well. And part of it, the consequences of resistance. So we know what happens with Violet in Feed when she resists the system. It kills her. And with Parvana, she's invisible when she becomes a boy, for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
She's highly visible when she's a girl, and invisible if she's wearing the burqa? The burqa.
The burqa.
Yeah.
I did like that when they finally get to the camp at the end, that, she talks about people telling her that she needs to be covered, and basically she tells them to fuck off.
She really does.
Like, you go.
She's
right. I would have
about stuff like that.
And she was going to be able to find something to cover up.
She's like, I
got
got
a
a
refugee camp.
Because at that point, she hadn't found her mom yet, and she's got these kids to help take care of, and she's like, I got more important things to worry about than this right now.
Well, and just say to anybody who has told her to cover up, help me.
Right.
Give me something.
Well, it was cold anyway, so it's like if I had something to cover up,
I would.
because I'm freezing cold.
Right.
So.
And going
Think
back
this through. Go ahead.
Going back to the point that you made about resistance, and yes, we see that resisting the feed, Violet dies. But with Parvana, the situation is kind of the same. she doesn't lose her life. She loses a part of her life that she's found and come to love at the end. With Layla. With Layla, however we pronounce it.
I think it's Layla, yeah.
Either way, she loses a new sister that she's grown to care for and love as family. And there is no describing the loss of a family member.
And is it resistance what they're doing?
Well,
I mean, it's survival.
Yeah, exactly. But in that situation, surviving was the resistance. Because if you look at all the surrounding them, the Taliban constantly following them and chasing them, and the bombs and the minefield, them
staying alive,
surviving and staying alive was the resistance.
Yes.
I think she was also. Oh, somebody.
Go ahead.
I think Parvana was also resisting the way that adults had structured the world, especially when they came to the Green Valley, and she was like, we're not going to let any adults in here. They're going to ruin everything. We're going to resist the way they have done it.
Well, because when you think about it, the adults led them to war. The decisions of the adults led them to the war. So you don't have to, it's honestly true that they can resist being an adult by being themselves and being children and by surviving without adults.
Yeah.
I think another thing that she lost in this ongoing resistance, I mean, it just seems it's so relentless. She's losing a part of herself because she's so desensitized in some cases where, and I'm sure we'd all be the same, we're hoping somebody dies in the minefield.
Yeah, that's pretty, when Leela is saying, maybe somebody.
It's a good day.
Yeah, it'll be a good day.
That
for us.
really stood out.
That
to
was
me.
so.
And it was the same for Pravana. She was also losing a piece of herself that way.
Mm-hmm. Piece of her humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a pretty heavy-duty critique of the United States and anybody else who's busy bombing.
The next book talks about is Parvana being captured by the United States.
Oh, I haven't read that one.
And I didn't read it, but the synopsis says that she's captured by the United States and she's tortured for information. And because her letters that she writes has Asif's name, Hassan's name.
Oh dear, I guess I better read that.
And the torture, she doesn't say anything, but it has the letters they're concerned about.
Oh my gosh.
Even though the letters are.
They're innocent, yeah.
Yeah.
Innocuous.
Yeah.
A lot of it's made up.
Going back to what Alex was saying too, about that Parvana kind of challenges what the adults are saying, right? That Layla does the same thing, right? Like she yells at the planes, why are you doing this? Stop, you've killed enough.
Leave us alone. Yeah.
Exactly. I think she sends the same message just in a more direct way, which may be due to the age difference, but also to what she's seen, that she's points out the same thing that Pravana does about why are you killing our children? We haven't done anything.
And at the very end, it kind of seeps into some of the adults when Parvana finds her mother. Right before she finds her mother, I think it's the mother that says, haven't you taken enough of our children from us?
How many of us need
another child lost?
Yes, that is. I think that is the mother. Uh-huh.
So it's the resistance is slowly seeping into the people that need to be resisting it.
And what were you going to say, Emily?
On the adult thing, I was trying to find it where Parvana mentions it, but when she's first starting her journey and she encounters that woman who's just like crying and screaming, you see throughout the novel these adults just breaking down. And same with the grandmother too, and Parvana says somewhere, I think it was her, that that's just what adults do when they can't handle it. They just break down and they shut the world out. And I think that says a lot about the fact that these kids are traveling so far and just to survive, and the adults can't. survive.
Right.
Well, it doesn't her father, you know, when she when she comes across the wailing woman, doesn't she remember that her father told her that some people die before they
Yeah.
die?
Mm-hmm.
And that's, you know, how she recognizes what's happening to this woman.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that happens. That is something that happens, and with great trauma. Gosh, what was it? It's either something I was watching or reading, and it talks about. Oh, it would have been Holocaust narratives. I think it's from Devil's Arithmetic, where they're in a concentration camp, and Hannah, the young girl who goes back in time and is in this concentration camp, she's being warned about people who have gone beyond the pale and who aren't there anymore, but are there, but aren't there, and to be very careful of them because they've lost a grip on reality and everything else.
Night they talk about that too.
Yeah.
Elie Wiesel talks about, I think it's Akiba Droomer, who loses like his son, and so he's just like, I don't even
There's
care
nothing
anymore,
left
and he
of
just
it.
wanders around and is totally spaced out, and they just they try to keep him in the fold and try to bring him back to himself after he loses his son. He just
Trauma is zombie by trauma.
yes.
I mean,
What it comes down to.
I can see it happening, you know, because the thought of losing my own kids, I'd probably, you know, be very much the same way. So it's surprising how easy it is to lose that kind of grip sometimes.
Okay. Parvana's altering appearance as boy signals the social response to oppression or being marginalized as a girl in her society. Hence, cross-dressing has been used by her for a purpose. And so many of you brought up the calling it cross-dressing has been used by her for purposes of disguise, economic survival, and comfort. What dangers would threaten Parvana through her journey if she resisted this dehumanization of women by appearing with her real identity in public?
I think that would be disastrous. Like
cross-dressing or reverse gender is somehow a common trend even now in Afghanistan, because still the inequality of gender exists in some places there. So girls have to appear as boys in the public so that they can economically survive, and or also even if they want to attend schools, they want to be boys to be able to be allowed to attend school. So, but in case of Parvana, okay, he's now looks like boys, but it is dangerous because Taliban may
Conscript him.
yeah, of course, conscript. And so, in case of her, I think it is not logical to make herself as boys and appear as boys in the public, because it's more dangerous now for her.
And
In her situation, this is what I came to my mind when I was reading. Okay, so it's dangerous if she's a boy. Now, maybe she's taken by Taliban as a soldier or what.
Mm-hmm. As she's traveling by herself, though, she doesn't have any choice early on, because a girl can't travel safely.
Because of dangers like being raped, you mean?
Yes, and the Taliban, what they would do to how they would perceive a young woman traveling alone.
especially if she wasn't covered.
Well, remember they were gonna sell her. That's how she started on the journey to begin.
Well, she was still a
She was still a
boy.
boy at that point.
Yeah.
They knew. Oh.
No, I don't think
They
the
knew.
adults
Were they
knew.
gonna sell her as a girl?
They were
Oh,
gonna
I
sell
thought
her
they were
as
gonna
a
sell her
boy.
as a girl.
They were just gonna sell her to make a little money.
Yes.
So that they can continue feeding their own
Okay,
family.
I was thinking that.
And then later on, when she eases up on starts dressing, lets her hair grow, wears dresses and stuff. Part of that's because there's no threat at this point. But also the threat might be less because she has a family now that she is working within, with the grandmother, Leela, with Afik, and with Hassan. So it appears as a family kind of unit, which would, I think, I don't know, but that would seem to give her some measure of safety. I don't know though. I don't know. I can't say.
Each case has its own danger.
Yes.
Right.
It's just darn dangerous to be to exist in this place, whether from above and the bombs, or whether from starvation and thirst, whether from the Taliban. Yeah, there's nothing safe. And then please clarify more about the notion of paternalism that can result from authorial constructions, implied relationships between characters and readers. So how does Deborah Ellis eliminate that paternalism by removing herself as an intermediator or filter when she offers the actual voices of children in her works? I'm not positive that she does.
But the author says she does, yeah.
Yeah, but just because she says that.
There was a few sentences in there, and I wish I brought my book, but there was a few sentences in there that I wouldn't be able to remember the page, that I felt like it was Deborah speaking. It wasn't in quotations, but it was her saying something of the matter of what the scenario was, because it didn't pertain necessarily to the situation, and it didn't pertain necessarily to any of the characters, but it was like a comment on how bad this was, and it was something that we would all understand as, like, dialectically, we would understand it in our own words, but I was thinking about the translations, because it said that it's been translated in so many languages. Like, if this phrase, I had it marked, but if this phrase was translated, it wouldn't have been translated the way that I thought it would have, because it stood out so abruptly. It's like at the end of the paragraph, she's like, I'm just going to add this little thing. That's what it felt like.
Because I just can't help myself.
Yeah, that's what
Yes. The interference. But I think on this one, the person who's talking about Ellis eliminating the paternalism is that with the text that she's writing, where actual children provide the voice. So there's 3 of them. One's from Afghanistan, one's from someplace in Africa. I can't remember.
There it is. Israeli children speak our stories, our songs. African children talk about AIDS, and Off to War, voices of soldier children. That's on page 119.
Okay, yeah.
It says 119 on you.
Why you have to be logical?
Okay, page 119, she gave it to us. Well, she doesn't filter if she's just serving as a collector of these stories, then, she doesn't, then that is a way of eliminating the paternalism. But the very act of doing it might be a form of paternalism, of creating these collections. I don't know. Because she is an intermediary by creating them in the first place. And she has an agenda to do it. She wants the rest of the world, she wants mainly North America, to understand what's going on and that what's happening to these children. And she's books like Ravana's Journey sensationalize the hardships of children, which is troubling in some ways. But it's also a trend that's been occurring since about the 1960s. In fact,
Well, I mean, it's what gets your attention
yeah,
and,
disaster.
exactly. I mean, because no one can help but watch a train wreck.
Yeah.
I'll tell you though, the adults got my attention too. I mean, the grandmother, she
Oh,
was a
yeah.
heap in the corner and the.
I wasn't sure she was alive at first, and
Right.
I figured she would be.
She was
dead.
the relative.
And the blind one that was whimpering that she had to leave and, I mean.
Kirsty, after finding Hassan and before leaving, Pravana cleaned the house. She also cleans the cave after she meets Asif. Is there significance in the repetitive behavior of Pravana's cleaning? Why or why not?
Well, I mean, it kind of brings a semblance of control for
Oh,
her.
there is definite control.
Yeah.
Homemaking.
Right. Yeah.
But isn't it interesting? Because she comments herself that, they would be so stunned that I'm doing this kind of
Without
work
complaint.
without complaint and doing it without being told to do it, and that I actually kind of enjoy it. But yeah,
It brings about that normality,
Uh-huh.
at least for that moment.
and control.
Yeah.
It's
one
also
thing.
mindless. Like you don't
Yeah.
have to think about the bigger things. I'm focusing on sweeping.
Yes.
Well, that's why I do the dishes before I come here. 'Cause, like I need that moment
You
of
have to stop.
aloneness. Yeah, and that's why she does it. She needs that moment. She needs it to calm herself.
No, I mean, that's one of the reasons I clean the house when I'm really pissed. is 'cause
Yeah.
I need that time to.
I just need a minute. I just need a detox.
I'm gonna punch you if you.
No, the house gets really clean whenever my husband and I are in a fight.
Yeah, when I'm really mad.
That's
That's how Jonathan can tell when I'm really, really hacked off, is when I get up and just start cleaning like a maniac. He's like, oh,
Doc-
crap.
Isn't it interesting that she does female things though? She performs a role that is traditionally associated with females as taking care of the house. Of course, all of them Asif is participating in this too. But Asif participates also in child.
I was really
He's
surprised
pretty-
at how much of a child rearing character he was. Like,
Yeah.
and we don't ever really learn a whole lot of his history.
No.
You know, and so it's kind of like, well, how does he know how to take care of these? Because even whenever he's taking care of Leela's wound on her forehead, he's like, I've got more patience with this. Let me take care of this. Like he don't, and that's typically a more feminine role also. And so that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, he kind of surprised me all the way around.
He was better at changing the diaper too, right?
Yeah.
He did. I mean, he just really stepped into that whole paternal.
So he must have had experience.
Yeah, he's got some kind of pretty
there's-
major
We just don't
backstory.
have.
Yeah, we
we're
just
not
don't.
told his backstory.
Yeah, except that that he's been,
That he had a family, and it's
and that he was beaten and
By his
whipped
uncle.
and yeah.
Who was he living with?
his
An
uncle.
uncle.
Because his family died. Like he told this to Leela,
Uh-huh.
and Piranha was all like, "Why doesn't he talk to me?"
Who knows? The article mentions the idea of inadequate adults. Yes. Which features everybody's inadequate though in this. Heavily in Pravana's journey, the people in the camp who are going to sell her, the lost woman in the desert, Leela's grandmother, the man who has her clean out his chicken house. Dear God, that was I was so glad she went back for the chicken and the eggs.
Me too.
And many others are all adults featured in this story who do little to nothing to help Pravana and the other children. How about showing that adults are not always going to step in to help affect an adolescent reader?
Cultivates that independence.
Like, but at the same time, it cultivates that distrust.
Oh, yeah.
Because I mean, I'm raising adolescents at this point, and I repeatedly, tell them that if you really need something, please come to me. Not to distrust me, that I can help you. So, I mean, for me as a parent, it reads to me that you're cultivating that distrust in, ineffective adults.
But a lot of young adult literature does that.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the major things that it actually does focus on, and has since about the 1960s, because 1960s, starting with Fitzhugh's Harriet the Spy, doing Catcher in the Rye, and then moving on to really very pointed stories where adults are beyond inadequate, that they're alcoholics, their mom's taking too many drugs, dad or stepdad is an abuser, or they're beating their kids, or there's just they are inattentive, or, too busy doing their other things to pay attention to their kids. That was the norm, and not the, what would that other happen? Yeah.
With Greta, if she saw parents that weren't ignoring her, if she saw adults that weren't ignoring her, then she wouldn't be out there speaking on behalf of all of the children in the world. And that, I guess that's the call to action for children in this novel. It's just.
Yeah, and this is an activist novel. It assumes that young readers, and that's what part of this article is about. It assumes that young readers are going to pick up the banner.
There's a need.
Well, if they're not going to do it, I can. And part of that is because kids can be pretty idealistic. They haven't been. I'm generalizing way beyond what I should, but they haven't been. They're not as cynical.
They haven't been put into a box yet.
Yeah, they're just not quite as cynical. What happens after a lifetime of watching really bad things happen, my thought is, I can't do it all. Why do anything?
Yeah, they don't feel constrained yet. Like
No.
all their ideas, no matter how impossible they seem, to them are great ideas.
Mhm.
Unlike we as adults, we go, oh, well, there's no way we'd actually be able to put that into practice. So that's kind of why children are sometimes looked at for the next great thinkers.
And the ones that have been slapped around and are cynical, it shows like a secret.
Yeah, he is quite cynical. Okay, what'd I do with my phone, folks? So I know what time it is.
It's 6:21.
I had it out, didn't I?
I didn't see it tonight.
I know I silenced it, because once I silenced it, I put it in my purse. So it's okay. Maybe it's saying something that kids with unbounding hope and imagination can do something. I don't know. Katie, there you are, just in time, Katie. Steffler also notes that that assumptions about the child and childhood mean that groups of children are seen as single-minded and single-bodied rather than as being made up of specific and distinct individuals. And that's talking about that universal child. Doesn't this seem to be a similarity amongst all types of writers, not only those focusing on children from situations different from their assumed audience? So you want to speak to that, Katie?
Yeah, I just, when I read that, I just thought, what a broad statement. I just feel like I think writers in general kind of assume sometimes that their audience will receive something in a certain way, or make assumptions about their backgrounds or lived experiences. And I don't think it is limited to this type of writing. I think in general that's something that writers do, and maybe that's for a purpose, right? The author has to write to an audience, but I think sometimes it's interesting to see or to try to draw out what assumptions the author spoke to. Does that make sense at all?
Mm-hmm. And I had a breakthrough moment and it kind of slipped away.
It reminded me a lot of like the picture books texts that we read. A lot of them I was like, oh, you think that I know what this means and I have no idea, or the opposite of that. Yes, I understand that. It's like being over explained one way or the other. Or even like planets.
Junior Brown. I think the assumptions that were made, or maybe generalizations that were made, an audience that may have certain lived experience or may not have certain lived experience.
Right, because who's going to be reading Planet of Junior Brown? Who do you think?
Not me if it wasn't assigned.
Kids need to see themselves.
But where are they going to get the books? If kids homeless, how are they going to get their? I mean, unless they got the library card.
The school library.
From school,
possibly. Yeah.
Unless they're delinquent, like like our characters.
Well, and there are all these assumptions we make about childhood too. Recognizing that once again, childhood is different regionally, nationally, culturally, worldwide.
and
All different
generationally.
experiences. Yes, absolutely. I think about my dad. He was born in 1926, I think. And Mom and I were talking the other day about the life that he had. He had there were 6 of them, and it was the Depression was heading their way, and he was 5 when his mother died, and Dad couldn't take care of all of them. So he shipped them off to various relatives. And that's just how it was. Nobody thought about.
No one blinked.
Nobody blinked about that. That you just sent them to whoever could take care of them.
And now it'd be like,
oh my gosh, are you serious about doing this? Splitting your kids up? No.
Sending them off on their own, no matter how young they are?
No. So all of those assumptions that we make, we have to, in order to accomplish certain things, like write a book, for instance, or teach, or do anything that we do. But yeah, that universal child. That's one of the things that I've always fought against with students who want to make these broad statements about how children will behave, or read, or think, or react. But I was such an oddball that I know for a fact, and probably a lot of you too were. I'm guessing.
I'm guessing when my children.
Yeah, just off the.
Just a wee
bit. I know. I sure was. Oh my goodness, it caused a lot of grief and pain.
My mom used to say that she had to teach me how to have fun. I
can see this actually.
I'm a very serious child. Oh, it's me.
It's you. And I asked this same question. Who has the answer to this? Why is it significant that To Kill a Mockingbird is the last one of Pravana's father's books that she keeps? Is someone in Pravana's story the Mockingbird as Tom Robinson is in Harper Lee's work? If so, and how, who and how did you come to that conclusion? Finally, what message is conveyed when the children literally eat the pages of the book?
Of all the books in all the world,
why?
Why To Kill a Mockingbird? Are the children the mockingbird? Because they're being sacrificed because no one's taking care of them, society's against them? Is it one of them in particular?
Is it because Deborah Ellis really likes that novel?
Right. It could be absolutely nothing, but it just seems so bizarre. And that they think of mockingbird as akin to a chicken,
Yeah, How to Kill a Chicken.
I just thought that was. Because even as a kid, I thought that To Kill a Mockingbird was about killing a mockingbird before I'd actually read the novel. And so they're just such childlike minds. I just liked that refreshment in that particular scene.
Well, and during that scene, I almost felt kind of bad because I guess I never really thought about the fact, because I was reading it in English, that they couldn't speak or understand or read it in English. And then when they were like, well, what does it say? And she was like, well, I know a little English. And I was like, oh my gosh, how strange to be reading this in English. And
Our character's not.
yeah.
Mhm.
I have a thought
Yeah,
about why it might be To Kill a Mockingbird.
Why?
I think in To Kill a Mockingbird and in Parvana's journey, there's a sense that everybody knows the injustices that are going on, but there's really nothing permanent being done about it.
nobody does any, I mean, you got somebody trying to help with Parvana and with Atticus, but
But it's almost
Right, if I they know
ineffectual.
they can't win.
Right.
and we know how To Kill a Mockingbird ends.
I think it's really specific about just a shared sense of the injustice of innocence dying. You know, like a bird is just this innocent creature that does beautiful things, much like children.
Yeah, and a mockingbird is so cool because a mockingbird can create any song it hears from other birds.
They're also
It-
mean though.
It doesn't have an original. It doesn't have an original song, I don't think. It. So what does that mean?
I think children are a lot like that. Like they're molded by everything
That,
around
that
them
they just repeat what they hear.
in a sense. And I think that same sort of sin to kill this innocent creature that's capable of all these things and potential. And I think that's in that, like one of the final lines that the mother says about how many children have to die.
Yeah.
I think that's that shared theme across both of these particular books.
It can also be, you know, with a mockingbird repeating things like Parvana, like we have her story recorded here, but her story is every child's story in Afghanistan. So it kind of goes back to, this is not an original thought. This is normal, common, everyday life, just like a mockingbird song is not original.
But I thought about it too. I thought, and I don't know if I didn't think about it when I read it other times, because I read it more than once. That's faulty memory.
I mean, it made me real sad when they ate the book, just because to get to that point of desperation. And then, like, as a parent, seeing kids starve like that, I was just like, oh my God, I can't do this.
Yeah. Jill asks, in Parvana's journey, the main antagonist in the story is the environment, both ecological and man-made. How does the adversity the children encounter mirror a more globalized situation children are facing in our world today? And that goes back to Greta and the others. So I felt compelled to include that because we're talking about this globalization. This is not just in one spot. And what Parvana is experiencing in Afghanistan in this novel is not isolated. It happens in other countries. Anytime.
I mean, it could have been in any country. It's just, we were specifically told it was Afghanistan. But that's one thing that I noticed in reading this is, even though I kind of knew what time period this was put in based on like the technology and stuff that they had, it still felt real timeless and real placeless, because it could have been anywhere and anytime during any of these.
And I think it was at that moment that I thought about the nature of dystopia, that it doesn't take much to take reality and transform it into dystopia. Because what else is this?
Right, and it only takes that one what if for things to really just skew the wrong direction.
Yeah. Yeah, one added dimension turns this into a dystopia. So say the addition of, instead of American bombers, that it's some kind of something from a different planet.
Cyborgs.
Cyborgs.
The board.
The board.
Uh-huh.
What if it's the board?
Resistance is futile. Computer tried stuff in there.
Jeremy. Pravana is a westernized, secularized, this is a fascinating question, character in the middle of an overtly religious conflict. Pravana's religious life is limited to writing letters to her absent friend, Shazay. I think that's how it's pronounced. The nearest any other character comes to a religious act is Layla's ritual feeding of the earth to protect her from landmines. Characters engage culturally relevant taking tea, but do not say, and how would I say that?
Inshallah.
Inshallah, or God willing, after stating intent to do something. Does the removal of religious and cultural realities foreign to a Western audience serve to make the story more relatable to Westerners? Does their absence create a less authentic picture of the culture and people being portrayed? What are your thoughts on this, Jeremy? It's a great question.
Yeah, that
This
was
is a real thinker.
Yeah, it kind of jumped out at me how absent it was from it, from the story. So I'm not really sure if this was unintentional act of the writer, or if it really was a marketing choice. Because I would not be surprised if Parvana herself is more secular, because her father is educated in England, so that wouldn't be the
Right.
unusual. But
And he wanted his daughter to be educated too.
exactly. But I wonder about Asif and Layla not really having anything. The only mention I remember is like Ramadan, and that could be something that's secularly celebrated, but at the same time, there are also the villages that they pass by. And we never see really anything of overt religion going on. And you would expect, especially rural, poor people tend to be more religious.
Yeah.
Do you suppose that could be hidden away, though, just out of safety? You know, with the Taliban randomly coming through different places.
I don't know. Authors really, contemporary authors really shy away from a lot of inserting religious ideologies.
Well, that's become that they don't want to insert it and then certain groups be against their work. You know, it's just, you end up with another banned book.
Yeah, or that the authors themselves perhaps are not religiously inclined.
So what about Leela's ritual feeding of the earth? Like, where did she get that? Is that her own thing, or is that
I feel
a village
like she's
thing?
really young though, and I feel like that's what how she's interpreted her ability to be safe. Like maybe she accidentally spilled some food on the ground and then was able to go out into the minefield and not get blown up, and she connected the two. Because I felt like she was way young, like, 5, maybe 6, or at least mentally.
Layla was 8 years old.
She's
Really?
8, but
she just seemed mentally much younger.
Well, when your parents leave and you don't have anyone else around you, especially because she was so isolated, her development slows.
Right.
Way slower.
So I think that's
And she
kind of
has a non-communicative grandmother
right.
Who she takes care of.
who she takes care
As
of.
best as she can.
I don't know. I've studied quite a bit about religion and in adolescent literature, and what I see when it occurs, well, there's usually some really specific purpose for including it. So perhaps some kind of critique of fundamentalism, for instance. And I don't remember if anybody here who's taken my classes before remembers reading Evolution, Me, and Other Freaks of Nature. No? Okay. Because that's a critique of fundamentalism and a critique of a group of students who, the school's teaching evolution, but the science teacher's teaching evolution, but that they're opposed to that. And becomes problematic. I don't know how Westerners would react. I don't know how I would react to the inclusion of some form of religion in this. I don't know.
And it was really shortly after 9/11. So a lot of film and books and magazines and everything, because of 9/11, they cut a lot of things. So I imagine if it did include religion, maybe she had to.
There are the material conditions that create a certain set of circumstances. Not to be Marxist or anything. Okay, got 10 minutes. Jennifer Walker, drawing from Judith Butler's notion of gender performance, can we apply this theory to performing childhood? Because we act like childhood is this natural thing, right? It can be argued that childhood is as much a social construction as gender. So within these parameters, childhood too is performed. The performance of childhood is influenced by social norms and expectations, but can clearly be disrupted by circumstance. Children like Pravana and Asif must endure circumstances that force their performances to be displaced by survival.
Oh, I like that.
Yes. Most critics, most theorists of children's and adolescent literature ascribe to childhood as a construct. Because it's changed so much. How can it not be a construct? Because it keeps changing according to cultural values and attitudes and ideologies and whatever is prevalent at the time. And it's even hard to say overall what people value about childhood or what they think about childhood. I think almost everybody agrees that they should get an education. What kind of education is a really different and diverse question, though, because you have people who homeschool because they don't think that that they're getting the education they need, or they are being too influenced by liberal thought or a whole bunch of different things. So you have all of these different attitudes about like the construction of the education of childhood or of children. So yeah, what are you thinking about some ways that childhood is performed?
It's hard to put it into words. I just know that I noticed it. I think based on what we expect from our children, they perform.
They internalize our expectations.
Right. And those performances differ across time and space, but whenever survival comes into play, they don't get the luxury of performance. So it's not natural. That's how I saw it as performance, because it can be halted.
When, so some of the performance of childhood that Pravana tries to accomplish would be her imagining, creating that story. Oh, and speaking of that treasure, I have to say, I'm so glad it was the treasure that she mentioned was Alexander's treasure. Because guess what treasure I first thought of? Treasure Island. Western, of course.
That kind of speaks to her education, her father.
It does, yeah. So it says
that was quite an interesting choice, because usually when you think, ooh, digging a treasure, it is a pirate's loot, you know?
But it wouldn't be the case in this area. So her making up the stories, the fantasies, I think that would be some kind of performance of childhood. She points out when she's not getting to play the child, as when she's making the comments that this is not how things should be.
Maybe an example would be playing with dolls. You know how some And because she talks about leaving him sometimes, you know, like you would a doll, not a child.
Yeah, really.
Well, and I think that whole relationship between Ravana and Asif, like, is very child, because she looks forward, even though she doesn't admit it, she looks forward to those fights so that they can both save face. She knows it's coming. She knows what his ploy is, and yet she engages in it.
I bet it would just be so
And she
annoying
lets
to
him
stay
win.
with you.
And she lets him win.
And I feel like there was some kind of reflection between, because she complains about Noria, her sister, how they would bicker all the time. So it was almost like she can't stand her, but she loves her, and
So
it's almost like
Asif
she's
is taking the place.
of that dynamic or that relationship
That makes
missing
sense.
from her life.
And when she was pretending, you know, she was pretending to lay out the house with the addition, and there wasn't room for Nori, and she said, well, she could sleep outside.
I have to admit, growing up with other girls, yeah, that's, I have a younger sister that I probably would have let sleep outside too.
So I'd say that it's just disrupted by circumstance, but it's the actual, but it's all, since it's all a performance, since it's all a construction, since we can't say what children will or will not do, undirected, because they've always got direction. I mean, we've heard of feral children and what happens with them. So there's nothing natural about childhood. It's not unnatural, but it's not natural either.
What we were talking about earlier about the Westerners feel like they need to bring our ideas to. Sorry, I can't find the words today. To the Eastern world. I think that the performance of childhood also is included in that. Like, oh, look at, they're not performing right. We need to enlighten them.
Yeah,
How children
yeah.
should perform.
Yeah.
When in reality, we have so many children that don't get that luxury in this country either.
Right, because, you know, we see the children having to do more work and whatnot, you know, in the East, because there's more stuff, you know, to be done there. They don't have the privileges that we do here. And so we think, oh my God, they're depriving these children of childhood. And so we have to go in and fix it. It's like, well, what is there really to fix? That's just how things are.
Yeah, and it's hard to draw that line. And Jennifer Ellison, you're going to be the last. In a suffering culture or individual, if a suffering culture or individual becomes, quote, translated into a global concept of suffering, in what ways could this promote invisibility?
If everybody's got it, then you don't look at it. Kind of like saying if everyone is special, then no one is.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, everybody gets an award, so what does an award then mean? If everyone gets it. Except another thing to dust. Yeah, and I think we addressed this a little bit earlier too, Jennifer, about earlier in the class that just don't want to see it.
You just want to turn a blind eye to it because it makes you uncomfortable. It makes you
Yeah.
feel responsible, and you know, oh my gosh, now I have to do something.
Well, I kind of.
I got enough to do.
One more thing.
Would you like to say anything to it, Jennifer?
I mean, we definitely covered a lot of aspects of it. I think I was looking at it from a slightly different perspective in that, which I don't know if I'm going to be able to articulate very well, but I was thinking of it like when we read these books, even from like this Western perspective, then, you know, we really don't think about everything that she represents. That this is happening to so many people. And I never really consider that fine line between advocacy and exploitation of, you know, you're not thinking about Parvana at all. You're thinking about what she represents. And then in that sense, Parvana has now lost the voice, whatever voice that was. She's a fictional character, but, you know, I think I was just kind of struck by this idea of representation being that which is that voice, the individual in that sense, and it really does lost in generality or generalization.
And I had something that I was going to add to that. Off it went.
We're all struggling today.
Oh my goodness.
No worries.
All right, so I'll be on campus all next week. If you want to see me, I'm having conferences with freshmen. Woo!
Good times, have I all?
That is, if they email me and sign up for them. If they want to pass the class, I made that clear. No, it's up to them. And I've enjoyed the discussion. It was a rich text.
It was really good. It's like, this is one of the ones I'm gonna have my kids read.
Really? Okay.
Well, I mean, it's just, it didn't, you know, it really made me think, and I would like my kids to to get a glimpse of how things could be.
Oh, okay. I know what I was going to say about that. Yes, it is that. Part of the article that I wrote about, I picked up on something when I would look at Amazon reviews, was that I'm so lucky I don't live there. And then that's it.
Yep.
Well, great for you and your privilege. It's this syndrome that, phew, escape that one. And it's young people who are writing these things. Kind of that alleviation of, it's really solipsistic.
Because, could it be though? Because, like, it's not a happy ending, but she at least finds her mom, which is what she was trying to do the entire time. And she has this idea of a mostly complete, wrapped up story.
Yeah.
Whereas in Feed, like,
It
just
cuts
cuts, yeah, you're just like,
Yeah,
I
this has a
don't
relatively.
like that.
I would have my kids read Feed, but for some of the language in it. That's the only thing that's really stoppable in the sexualization, because my kids are only 11 and 12. So, but I want them to read that one eventually as well, because it does, like, it made me very uncomfortable, and I'm like, I kind of want my kids to sense that too, because it's kind of what's necessary in order
Yeah.
to prevent things from.
But what I was picking up from these reviews, it was kind of this, like I said, phew, I'm so lucky I live here.
Right.
Right. Now it's your turn to do something. So, yeah.
I went, that was one of my questions, like, how would it have been different if we just left her holding Lila's lifeless body at the end?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been hard.
Like, would it have resonated more? Would it have prompted more? Or would it have exploited her? Like,
Yeah, I don't know. All right, it's been wonderful. You have a good week without me next week. Be well, everybody, and see you in a while.